She shoved the telegram into her coat pocket and stepped off that train, shaking so hard she nearly dropped her suitcase on the platform. 18 years old, no family waiting, no way back home. Just a name on a piece of paper, Levi Hunter, and a promise she wasn't sure either of them intended to keep. If you've ever walked into something terrifying, because staying behind was even worse, you already know exactly what Sophia felt in that moment. Subscribe, hit the bell, and watch all the way through. Then tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? The platform at Millhaven, Colorado was nothing like the pictures Sophia had carried in her mind during all those long days and nights ends on the train. She had tried not to imagine too much. She had told herself not to build any kind of dream around a man she had never met, a place she had never seen, a life that hadn't happened yet. But the human heart doesn't listen to warnings like that. Somewhere around the second day of travel, somewhere between the flat emptiness of the plains and the first pale suggestion of distant mountains, she had let herself wonder. Maybe it would be a clean little town. Maybe there would be flowers somewhere. There were no flowers. There was dust. There was the hard smell of horses and coal smoke. There was a woman arguing with a shopkeeper about the price of flour, and two men loading barrels onto a wagon, and a dog sleeping in the shadow of the station wall. Sophia stood on the platform with her suitcase at her feet and told herself to breathe. She was 18 years old, and she had traveled 600 miles to marry a stranger. Her name before this was Sophia Bennett, and she had been a laundry girl in Cincinnati, working 6 days a week in a building that smelled like lye soap and other people's misery. Her mother had died 2 winters ago. Her father had left long before that, left so completely that she no longer thought of him as someone who had ever actually existed, just a shape in an old story. She had a landlady named Mrs. Holt, who raised the rent every 3 months with a smile that never touched her eyes. She had a drawer with $11 in it. She had nothing else. The advertisement had appeared in a Cincinnati paper in March. Seeking a steady and willing young woman of good character for honest companionship and partnership on a working ranch in Colorado. A man of 28, sound of limb, owner of land and cattle, looking for someone who wants a real life more than an easy one. Write to L. Hunter, Millhaven, CO. Sophia had read it 4 times before she folded it and put it away. She had taken it out the next morning and read it again. She was not a foolish girl. She knew what these advertisements sometimes meant. She knew the stories women who had gone west and found something much worse waiting for them than the life they'd led left. But she also knew what $11 and Mrs. Holt's rent looked like as a future, and she knew it looked like nothing. She wrote a letter. He wrote back in 2 weeks. His handwriting was plain and careful, like a man who took his time and didn't waste words. He told her about the ranch, 140 acres, good grazing land, a well that didn't run dry even in August. He told her he had 40 head of cattle and a horse named Chester who had an opinion about everything. He told her the honest truth, which was that he had tried to manage the ranch alone for 5 years, and the ranch was winning. He said he wasn't looking for a servant. He said he was looking for a partner, if she was willing to try, and he was willing to try, and they found out they could stand each other. That last sentence was the one that made her say yes. Not the land, not the cattle. That one sentence about trying. She wrote back and said she was willing. 3 months of letters had followed. They were careful letters, both of them. She told him about working in the laundry and about her mother and about the things she was good at. She could cook, she could keep accounts, she could mend almost anything. He told her about a bad winter 2 years back that took 11 of his cattle and nearly took him, and about his neighbor Jim Calloway, who was the nosiest man in 3 counties, and about how he hadn't been inside a church since his mother's funeral, but he believed in keeping his word. She had laughed at the letter about Jim Calloway. She had read the part about keeping his word 3 times. And now she was standing on a platform in Millhaven, Colorado, and she was trying to find a man she had never seen. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly. She had no photograph of him. He had offered to send one, and she had said it didn't matter, which she had believed when she said it, and now was not so sure. She scanned the platform slowly, trying to read faces, trying to find someone who looked like their letters. She almost missed him. He was standing back from the crowd near the far end of the platform, not pushing forward the way the other men were the ones greeting wives and sisters and freight deliveries with big gestures and bigger voices. He was just standing there, still, watching the train the way a man watches something he's not entirely sure about. He was taller than she expected. That was the first thing. Broad through the shoulders, lean through the middle, with the kind of build that comes from actual work rather than any intention. His hat was pushed back on his head. His jacket was worn at both elbows. His boots were the color of the road. He was not what she had pictured, and she couldn't have told anyone exactly what she had pictured, but he was not it. And then he saw her. She knew the moment it happened because he went very still, stiller than he already was, which was already very still, and something moved across his face that she couldn't name. Not disappointment, not relief either. Something more complicated than either of those. Like a man doing arithmetic in his head and finding the answer was different from what he expected. He walked toward her. He took his hat off when he was about 4 steps away, which struck her as something she hadn't expected, and he held it in both hands. Miss Bennet. It wasn't a question. He had seen her the same way she had seen him recognizing something without being able to say exactly what. Mr. Hunter. They stood there for a moment, both of them, in the particular silence of two people who have exchanged 100 written words and are now discovering that words on paper and a living face are entirely different things. How was the journey? His voice was low and flat, not unfriendly, the voice of a man who didn't perform warmth but didn't withhold it either. Long Sophia kept her own voice steady. She had decided on the train that whatever she felt when she arrived, she was not going to let it show on her face. She had kept that promise for approximately 30 seconds, and now she wasn't sure. The mountain surprised me. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, the suggestion of one. They do that. He picked up her suitcase without asking. Not roughly, just simply, the way a man picks up something that needs carrying. He turned toward the end of the platform and glanced back to make sure she was following. Sophia followed. She told herself it was going to be fine. She told herself this with the particular forcefulness of a person who is not at all sure it is going to be fine. The wagon ride to the ranch took the better part of 2 hours, and Sophia spent a good portion of it trying to learn him, without letting him see her doing it. He drove the way he talked, economical, not wasteful. He didn't fill the silence with noise. He pointed out landmarks occasionally, the kind of practical information that mattered. That crossroads, that creek, where the road got bad in rain. Chester, the horse, was a big bay gelding, who did indeed appear to have opinions. He shook his head at a particular bend in the road for no visible reason, and Levi said, "He doesn't like that curve," with the same tone a man might use to report that it looked like rain. Why not? Something spooked him there 2 years ago. He's never told me what. It was the most he'd said at once, and Sophia found herself unexpectedly wanting him to keep going. She looked at the side of his face and found nothing she could read. The letters she started and stopped. What about them? They were very, she chose the word carefully, honest. He was quiet for a moment. The wagon rolled over a rough patch and she gripped the seat. "I figured if we were going to start something," he said, "we ought to start it honest. Most people don't." Another silence. This one felt different from the earlier ones, less like a gap and more like an agreement. "The ranch," Sophia said. "You said it needs work." "It does." He glanced at her sideways. The look lasted about 1 second, but she caught it a quick reassessment, like a man who had said something expecting one response and gotten another. "More kinds than I can list on a wagon ride." His jaw shifted slightly. Not annoyance. Something more like recalibration. "Fence line on the east pasture needs rebuilding from last winter's damage. Supply ledger is a mess. I'm good with cattle and not much else when it comes to numbers. Smokehouse roof needs patching before fall. And the kitchen garden is entirely out of control because I kept meaning to get to it and kept not getting to it." Sophia had been listening with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight. "I can do the ledger," she said. "And the kitchen garden. The fence and the roof I'd need to learn." He looked at her again. This time the glance lasted longer. "You're not what I expected." The sentence landed between them with the kind of weight. "What did you expect?" "Someone more." He stopped. Reconsidered. "Uncertain. I'm terrified," Sophia told him with a directness that surprised even her. "I'm just not uncertain." "Those are different things." Levi Hunter turned back to the road. Chester flicked an ear. "Yes," he said after a moment. "They are." The ranch announced itself before it came into view. She heard cattle first, low and distant, the sound carrying across open ground the way sound does when there's nothing to stop it. Then she saw the fence line he'd mentioned, running alongside the road, and she could see even from a distance that he hadn't exaggerated about the damage. 3 sections were down completely. Another was leaning at an angle that suggested it had given up arguing with gravity and was simply waiting for permission to fall. She didn't say anything about the fence. The house itself was smaller than she had permitted herself to imagine. A solid enough structure log built, 2 rooms she could see from outside, with a covered porch and a woodpile stacked along one wall that at least told her he thought ahead. A barn sat back and to the left, larger than the house, which made a certain practical sense. There was a well in the yard, a chicken coop, also in better repair than the fence, a vegetable patch that had indeed gone entirely wild, herbs and weeds fighting each other for territory with nobody supervising. Levi brought the wagon to a stop in the yard and set the brake. He got down and came around and offered her his hand to help her down. She took it. His hand was rough as bark and entirely steady. "It's not much," he said. He was looking at the house, not at her, and his voice had done something gone a little flat in a specific way that she recognized as the way people sound when they're bracing for judgment. Sophia looked at the house for a moment. "It's real," she said. He looked at her then. "That was the advertisement," she said. "A real life more than an easy one. I read it twice." She met his gaze steadily. "I meant what I wrote back." Something happened in his face that she almost didn't catch, a momentary loosening, like a fist opening, gone almost before it started. He nodded once and picked up her suitcase from the wagon bed. "I'll show you where things are," he said. Inside, the house was clean in the specific way that a man's house is clean when he has made a genuine effort he is not accustomed to making. Everything was in its place, but the places had been decided by utility, not any other consideration. The table was near the window. The stove was big and well maintained. There were 2 chairs and a shelf with 6 books on it, and a lamp that had clearly been polished recently. He showed her the bedroom, hers, he made clear without making it awkward, which she appreciated. He would take the small room off the back, which he had apparently been using as a storage room, and had partially cleared for this purpose. "There's still some equipment in the corner," he said. "I can move it tomorrow. It's fine, there's water in the pitcher. I can heat some if you need to wash." That would yes. "Please." He went to heat the water and she stood in the bedroom alone and pressed both hands flat against the top of the dresser and breathed. In, out. The mirror above the dresser showed her a girl with dust on her collar and shadows under her eyes and hair that had lost most of its morning arrangement somewhere around Kansas. She looked at that girl for a moment. "You made your choice," she told herself. "Now make it work." She didn't know yet whether it could work. She didn't know yet who Levi Hunter really was, underneath the careful words and the worn jacket and the horse with opinions. She didn't know if she could build something in this strange, hard, beautiful place, or if she would find out in 6 months that she had read those letters wrong and the life she'd come to was nothing like the one she'd imagined. But she knew one thing: she wasn't going back. The first 2 weeks were a negotiation in almost everything but name. They were careful with each other in the way of 2 people who are aware that a wrong step could damage something that hadn't properly formed yet. Sophia established her territory by degrees. The kitchen became hers within the first 3 days, not by declaration but by occupation. She reorganized the dry goods storage in a way that made it possible to see at a glance what was running low. She started on the supply ledger the second evening, sitting at the table with a stub of pencil and the chaos of Levi's records spread out before her. He came in from the barn and stopped when he saw her at the table. "I wasn't going to. You don't have to start tonight." "I want to." Sophia didn't look up from the ledger. "Sit down if you want. I have questions." He sat. He answered her questions about the cattle sales from last fall, about the prices he'd got for a calf he'd sold in February, about a debt to the feed store that he'd noted in his own shorthand, and she couldn't parse. He was patient about it. He didn't make her feel like she was prying. When she got to a column that didn't balance, she showed him. "This account for March. You've got an outgoing figure of $4.60, but I can't find what it was for." He looked at where she was pointing. His jaw tightened slightly. "Doctoring fees. For the cattle." Sophia waited. "There was a family about 3 miles north," he said. "The Alvarez family. The father got hurt in January. Horse came down on his leg. By March they were in bad shape. I paid for the doctor to ride out twice." She looked at the column, then at him. "You didn't mark it as charity." "It wasn't charity. They've helped me 3 times since. Last fall's roundup and twice with fence repairs." He met her eyes briefly. "I just didn't know what column to put it in." Sophia looked at the ledger for a moment. Then she made a small note in the margin, "Alvarez, mutual aid," and drew a line to a new column she labeled "community account." "It goes here," she said. with the others like it. He watched her do it. Are there others like it? 4 more that I can find. I'll mark them when I get there. She moved to the next page. The Calloway entry in November, is he the neighbor you mentioned? The nosy one? Something changed in Levi's face. It was the closest thing to amusement she'd seen from him yet. That's him. What's the $12 for? He lent me money the winter I lost the cattle. I paid him back in December, and he argued about taking it. He argued about you paying back a loan. Said I should keep it and put it toward the spring stock. Took me 20 minutes to get him to take the money. Sophia looked at the ledger. He sounds like a problem. He's the best neighbor I've ever had. She made another notation and turned the page. I'll need to meet him eventually. He'll come to you. He's already come by twice, since he heard you were arriving. I kept finding reasons why it wasn't a good time. Sophia stopped writing. Why Levi was quiet for a moment. I thought you might need to settle first, before you had to be presented to the town. The word presented hung between them. Sophia understood what he meant, not presented like a possession, but presented like something fragile that people would examine and measure and have opinions about. He had been trying to give her time before that started. She looked back at the ledger so he couldn't see her face. Thank you for that, she said. He didn't answer, but she heard the chair shift slightly, and she knew he had heard her. It was Jim Calloway who finally arrived on the 8th day, appearing at the door before breakfast with his hat in his hand and a look of uncontainable curiosity that he had made absolutely no effort to contain. He was a compact, sun-weathered man of perhaps 50, with the deeply lined face of someone who had spent 5 decades squinting at the Colorado sky, and eyes that moved like a bird's quick, bright, missing nothing. I told Levi to bring you by last week, he announced, before Sophia had fully opened the door. He kept having excuses. I finally told him I'd just come myself, which I would have done days ago, except Martha said to give you time to settle, and I listened to Martha about most things. He stopped, extended his hand. Jim Calloway, I'm your nearest neighbor, and I'd guess your most complicated one. Sophia shook his hand. Sophia Hunter. The name came out before she'd consciously decided to use it. She felt it land. Calloway's eyebrows went up about a 1/4 inch. Well, he said. Good. And then completely unexpectedly, his face did something soft and genuine. I'll tell you something. Miss Sophia Levi Hunter is the stubbornest, most close-mouthed, hardest-to-help man I have ever known in 50 years, and I include my own father in that comparison. But he is a good man. Genuinely good, the kind that gets rarer every year. He put his hat back on his head. He's also going to stand right there and turn red if I keep saying this, so I'll stop. Sophia glanced back into the room. Levi had appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and the room. And Jim Calloway was entirely correct. He was standing very still, with the particular expression of a man who wishes he were currently elsewhere. Come in, Mr. Calloway, Sophia said. I'll put coffee on. Martha sent pie, Calloway said, producing a cloth-wrapped parcel from behind his back with the air of a man playing his strongest card. Apple. She said not to come empty-handed because that would be rude. Martha sounds wise. She's the most sensible person in this county. Don't tell her I said that. It'll only encourage her. He stepped inside, patted Levi on the arm as he passed him. Levi endured this and settled himself at the table with the ease of a man who had sat at it before. Sophia went to put the coffee on and heard. Behind her, Jim Calloway began telling Levi about a problem with his fence on the south pasture that was probably related to the same damage that had hit Levi's east line, and Levi responding in the flat, patient tones of a man who has heard about Jim Calloway's south pasture fence before and was prepared to hear about it again. She worked at the stove and let the sound of their voices settle around her. It wasn't a home yet. She knew that. A home was built out of days and seasons and mistakes and repairs and things that had nothing to do with the 4 walls around them. But it was the first morning that had felt like the beginning of one. On the 11th day she found the box. She had been going through the supply shed, taking stock of what was there and what was running low, and it was wedged under the back shelf behind a coil of rope, a flat wooden box, heavy for its size, with a latch but no lock. She almost left it there. It wasn't her business, and she had already learned that there were parts of Levi Hunter's life that existed before her and that she moved around rather than into. But the latch was open, and when she shifted the rope, the lid came up an inch. She stood there for a moment. Then she carried the box inside and set it on the table and went to find him. He was at the fence on the east line, working on the damaged section, with a post driver and a determination that she had come to recognize as his default response to any problem: silent, concentrated, relentless. He looked up when he heard her coming. "I found a box," she said. "In the supply shed. I didn't open it. I thought you should know it was there." Something crossed his face that she hadn't seen before. He set the post driver down. He walked back to the house without explaining, and she followed, and he went to the table and stood in front of the box for a moment with his hands at his sides. Then he opened it. Inside were letters, a stack of them, tied with string. And beneath the letters, a photograph, the kind that came from a proper photographer, stiff and formal, of a woman with light hair and a serious expression, standing in front of a painted backdrop with her hands folded. Levy stood looking at the photograph for a long moment. Sophia waited. "Her name was Clara," he said finally. His voice had flattened in the way it did when he was controlling something. "We were engaged. She died 3 years ago. Fever in the summer. Took her in 4 days." Sophia didn't move. Ned rished the sign. "I built the second room for her," he said. "The bedroom. She was supposed to." He stopped. "She never saw it." "I'm sorry," Sophia said. "It wasn't enough. It was never enough." She knew that. But she said it anyway, and she meant it in the complete, uncomplicated way that she had learned was the only honest response to grief. Levi closed the box. He set the latch. He picked it up and carried it back out to the supply shed. And she heard him from inside the house, heard the silence of him, putting it back where it lived, and then his boots on the boards coming back. He came through the door and stopped. "I should have told you," he said. "Yes, she didn't soften it. You should have. But I understand why you didn't." He looked at her directly. There was something raw in it, not the controlled, careful version of him she had been learning, but the actual version underneath. The one that had built a room for a woman who never got to see it, and had been carrying that ever since. "She would have wanted this," he said. "For the ranch to keep going. She believed in it more than I did, honestly." Sophia held his gaze. "Then we'll keep it going." He nodded, looked away. Looked back. "I won't let it be like that again," he said. "The keeping things. I'll tell you what there is to know. I'll hold you to that." The corners of his mouth moved. "Not much." "I imagine you will," he said. 3 weeks in, the town got its first real look at Sophia Hunter. Levi had resisted taking her into Millhaven for reasons he didn't fully state, and she had let him resist because she had been busy and because she had enough to learn on the ranch without adding a new social terrain. But the dry goods were running low, and the bank needed a signature on an account he was adding her name to, and there was no good reason to wait any longer. Millhaven was not a large town. It had a main street with the usual buildings, a general store, a bank, a doctor's office, a church, 2 saloons, and a hotel that served food. It had the particular quality of a place where everyone knows the outline of your business even when they don't know the details. And a new wife arriving by mail order advertisement was exactly the kind of detail that would have traveled at speed. She felt the looks before they were through the first block. Not hostile, mostly curious, the particular curiosity of people who have formed an impression in advance and are now comparing it to the reality. She heard a woman murmur something to another woman as they passed, and she kept her eyes forward, and her back straight and her hand through Levi's arm, because she had decided in the wagon that she was going to walk into this town tonight. She belonged in it, even if she didn't feel it yet. At the general store, the owner's wife, a large, forthright woman named Dora Prescott, came around the counter to look at her directly. "So you're the one who wrote back to Levi's advertisement?" It was not quite a question. "I am." Sophia met her eyes without flinching. "Where from?" "Cincinnati." Dora Prescott looked her up and down once thoroughly, without embarrassment, and then apparently made a decision. "Do you know how to brine pork? I've been arguing with my husband about his mother's recipe for 3 years, and I need a second opinion from someone who isn't from here." Sophia blinked. "I do know how to brine pork. Come to the counter." Dora turned and walked back toward the store without ceremony. She glanced back at Levi. "You know where the flour is. Go find it." Levi, to Sophia's surprise, went and found the flour without comment. Sophia went to the counter. It was not the welcome she had anticipated, not warmth, not hostility, just the pragmatic inclusion of a woman who had decided that the newcomer was useful and had no time for more complicated assessments right now. But it was something. It was real. She argued about the pork brine with genuine conviction, and Dora Prescott argued back with equal force, and by the end of it, they had reached a compromise that Sophia privately thought was better than either original position. And Dora had ordered 4 pounds of salt pork, wrapped for her with the commentary that she expected the argument to continue next time. When they left the store, Levi walked beside her for half a block before he said, "Dora Prescott doesn't argue about pork brine with people she doesn't respect. Is that the standard? Around here, more or less." Sophia considered this. She's going to find out she's right about the bay leaves, and I'm right about everything else. She heard him make a sound beside her, a short, contained sound. She was almost certain it was a laugh, and the fact that she couldn't be completely sure told her everything about how much further she still had to go with Levi Hunter. That evening she sat at the table after supper and wrote a letter to no one in particular. She had done this since she was 12 years old, written letters she never sent. To her mother when her mother was alive and couldn't be told certain things, to her father who had gone so completely she didn't know his address, to the version of herself that existed 6 months ago and would not have believed any of this. She wrote 3 pages and then folded them and put them in the back of the ledger where she kept her personal accounts. And when she looked up, Levi was standing in the doorway with his coat off and his sleeves rolled and a look on his face that suggested he'd been standing there long enough to see her finish but had chosen not to interrupt. Done. You were a little. He moved to his chair without arguing the point. He picked up the book he'd been working through. She had learned he read at night, consistently, always something with either practical application or history, and opened it to his page. The lamp between them put equal light on both their faces. It was domestic in a way that still startled her sometimes. The ordinariness of it. She had expected the frontier to feel rawer than this, more violent in its dailiness. But most of it was just this 2 people in a lamplit room, each doing their own thing, inside the same 4 walls. Levi. He looked up. "Tell me about before the ranch." She had been turning this question over for a week, waiting for the right moment, deciding this was as close as a right moment was likely to get. "Before you came to Colorado." He was quiet long enough that she thought he was going to pick up the book again, or find something that needed doing. Then he set the book face down on the table. "Kansas first," he said. "I was born in eastern Kansas. My father worked for a cattle outfit, same as his father. By the time I was 14, I was working it too." He paused. "It wasn't a bad life. Just not mine." "What do you mean, not yours?" "I mean my father loved it. He would have done it until he dropped. And he more or less did. He died on a cattle drive when I was 19. Heart gave out. Something moved in his voice. "My mother sold what we had and moved to her sister in Missouri. I had $300 saved and a horse, and I came west because that was the direction people went when they didn't know what else to do." Sophia was watching him. "And you found this place." "I worked for other men first, 4 years, learned what I could and saved what I could, and watched how the men who owned land managed it, and which ones managed it badly and which ones didn't." He looked at his hands on the table. "Bought this land in '82. It was cheaper then. The previous owner had given up on it." "Why did he give up?" "Mostly, some of it his own making." Levi's jaw moved slightly. "He told me I was a fool to buy it. Said the east pasture flooded every spring and the well would go dry. He was wrong about both." Sophia held the picture of that, a 23-year-old version of this man, standing in some lawyer's office in Millhaven, buying land everyone else had given up on, determined to make it work on nothing but savings and stubbornness. "Clara," she said carefully. "Did you meet her here?" His stillness changed quality. "She was a school teacher," he said. "From a town about 40 miles east. I met her at a church social. Jim Calloway dragged me to it against my better judgment, which is fairly typical of Jim." A pause. "She was the first woman I ever met who would argue back. About anything. She had opinions about everything. Politics, books, whether the cattle should have names." "Did they have names?" "Only the ones she named. I have 2 steers named President and Senator that she named as a joke and that I have stubbornly refused to rename on principle." He met Sophia's eyes. "She would have liked you." The sentence arrived without warning, and Sophia felt it in her sternum. "She would have said you were practical." "In the same way she was practical," he said. "And she would have been right about the ledger, and you would have had opinions about each other, and it probably would have been loud sometimes." Sophia kept her voice steady. "She sounds like someone worth knowing." She was. The lamp flickered. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "I'm not trying to replace her," Sophia said. "I want you to know that. I'm not. That's not what I'm here to be." "I know." His voice was direct, undeflecting. "I wouldn't have written that advertisement if I'd wanted a replacement. I wrote it because the ranch needed a partner, and I had stopped being able to do it alone." That's the honest truth of it. And now? He considered the question with the seriousness he gave every question. Now I think I may have gotten more than I knew how to ask for. Sophia looked at him across the table and felt something shift, not dramatically, not in any way she could point to and name, but somewhere below the deliberate surface of their careful negotiation, something had moved. All right, she said, good. She picked up her pencil and went back to the ledger. Levi picked up his book. The lamp burned between them. 4 weeks in, Jim Calloway arrived at the ranch on a Tuesday morning with his wife Martha, and without any warning, which Sophia was beginning to understand was simply how Jim Calloway operated and was not intended to be impolite. Martha Calloway was nothing like her husband in the most essential way, which was that she said exactly what she meant and never said it more than once. She was a spare, silver-haired woman with hands that had worked a ranch for 30 years and eyes that had seen most things a person could see and had calibrated their responses accordingly. She walked through the front door, looked at what Sophia had done with the front room in 4 weeks, the reorganized shelves, the different arrangement of the furniture, the herbs drying in a neat row she'd hung along the window frame, and said, "Good. That chair was in the wrong place for 4 years." Levi, standing behind her, said nothing. "Where did you put the flour?" Martha asked Sophia. "Left cabinet, top shelf. The cornmeal is below it and the salt is in the tin on the second shelf." Sensible. Martha had already moved toward the kitchen, and Sophia followed, leaving the 2 men in the front room where Jim was immediately beginning a sentence that started with the words, "Now, about that south pasture fence." In the kitchen, Martha Calloway sat down without being invited and folded her hands on the table. "How is it, honestly?" Sophia put the kettle on. "Honestly. I don't ask questions I want decorated answers to." Sophia turned from the stove. "It's hard in ways I expected and hard in ways I didn't. The work I can manage. I understood it would be real work." She paused. "Learning him is the harder part." Martha's expression didn't change, but something in it settled the specific settlement of a person who is hearing a true thing. "He's not a man who shows what he is, he shows what he does." She watched Sophia get the cups. "Did he tell you about Clara?" "Yes." "When?" 2.5 weeks in. "After I found the box." A silence. "He told Clara about his father a year into their engagement. He told you about Clara in the 2nd week." Martha's eyes were steady and assessing. "Take what you want from that." Sophia set the cups on the table and sat down across from her. "What do you take from it?" "I take from it that you said something to him that mattered before he expected anything to matter." Martha picked up her cup. Levi Hunter spent a long time deciding that being alone was a reasonable trade for not losing anyone else. It takes something specific to make a man like that change direction. "I didn't do anything specific. You told him you were terrified but not uncertain." Martha looked at her without expression. "Jim told me. He heard it from Levi. That's probably all you need to know about how often Levi repeats things he remembers." Sophia felt heat in her face that she hadn't felt in weeks. She kept her voice level. "He repeated that to Jim Calloway. Within the 1st week." Out the window, they could hear Levi's voice flat, patient, and Jim's voice, louder, describing the fence situation with considerable detail. Sophia looked at her cup. "He doesn't make it easy," she said. "No," Martha agreed. "He doesn't, but he makes it worth it, which is a different thing." She set her cup down. "How are you?" Underneath the work and the learning. "How are you?" The question arrived with a weight that the first version of it hadn't had. Sophia thought about the letters she wrote and never sent. She thought about the mornings she stood at the bedroom window for the first 30 seconds after waking and had to remind herself where she was and why, and that she had chosen it. She thought about the specific loneliness of building something with a person while, still not quite, being inside their confidence. "I'm steadier than I was," she said, "and I think that's the honest answer." Martha nodded once. "Good enough," she said. "Ask me anything you need to know about this county. I've been here longer than anyone except old Harlan at the bank, and he's half gone anyway." For the next 40 minutes, Sophia asked and Martha answered, and by the end of it, Sophia had more practical knowledge of Millhaven and its surroundings, who was reliable, who wasn't, where to buy seed and which supplier shorted the bags, which doctor was competent, and which one was competent when sober, than she could have gathered in months on her own. When the Calloways left, Levi came to the kitchen and found her at the table with a full page of notes. He looked at the notes. Martha talked. "Martha is extraordinary." "She is." He sat down across from where she'd been sitting. "What did she tell you about me?" It wasn't quite a question. Sophia considered her answer. That you told Jim I was terrified but not uncertain. She watched his face. The slight tightening that happened when he was caught doing something he hadn't intended to be caught doing. I said it because it was accurate, he said. I know. Sophia put her pen down. Did you say anything else? A pause. I said you reorganized the supply ledger in a way I should have done 3 years ago and hadn't. Sophia looked at him for a moment. That might be the most personal thing you've said to me since I arrived. The corner of his mouth moved. I'm working on it, he said. The trouble with Roy Tanner started on a Wednesday at the feed store. Sophia had gone into town alone. For the first time, Levi had work at the east fence that couldn't wait, and the feed store order needed to be placed before the week's delivery. And she had told him she was perfectly capable of managing a transaction at a feed store, which she was. He had agreed with a nod that suggested he was less sure than she was, and had the sense not to say so. Roy Tanner was leaning against the counter when she walked in, which meant he had been there long enough to take root, and he turned to look at her with the particular deliberateness of a man who wants it known that he is looking. She had heard Roy Tanner's name twice since arriving, once from Jim Calloway in a tone of voice that carried a clear valuation, and once from Dora Prescott in the same tone but louder. He was a man of about 35 with land to the west of Millhaven, and an ongoing dispute with Levi over water rights on the creek that crossed both properties, a dispute that predated Sophia's arrival by 2 years, and that Levi had mentioned once, briefly, as something in the background. Mrs. Hunter. The way he said it put something in the syllables that wasn't respect. You're Levi's mail-order girl. Sophia walked to the counter and addressed the store owner, who had gone visibly uncomfortable. I need to place an order for the Hunter account. 100 pounds of oats, 50 of corn, and 20 of the salt block. That's a lot of feed for a ranch that barely broke even last year, Tanner said, to the room rather than to her specifically. Sophia did not turn around. Add 20 pounds of bran, she told the store owner. I want to check the quality before I commit to more. He's paying for it with her dowry, probably. Tanner had moved and was now standing beside her at the counter, close enough that she could feel the deliberateness of it. She come with money. Most of these mail-order situations, the man's buying himself a housekeeper. Sophia turned to look at him directly. She had been afraid of many things since arriving in Colorado. She had been afraid of failure, of being wrong about Levi, of the ranch being beyond her, of the town deciding she was nothing before she had a chance to be something. She had worked through most of those fears by not letting them stop her. Standing in a feed store while a man with small eyes and a loud mouth tried to make her feel like a transaction was not, she decided, going to be the thing that stopped her today either. Mr. Tanner, she said. Her voice was entirely level. My name is Sophia Hunter. I run the accounts for the Hunter Ranch, which is a legitimate and solvent operation that will continue to be so, regardless of your opinion of its origins or mine. She held his gaze. If you have business concerns about the water rights dispute, my husband handles that directly. If you don't, I suggest we both finish our business here and go home. Roy Tanner's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. The store owner had found something extremely important to organize on the shelf to his left. Your husband, Tanner said slowly, is going to have bigger problems than water rights before this year is out. Sophia kept her eyes on his face. Was that a threat or a prediction? He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile, just something to think about. He walked out. The store owner slowly turned back from the shelf. He was a mild-mannered man named Fletcher, who had the look of someone who had just watched a thing he hadn't expected. His account, Sophia said calmly. Does he owe the store anything? Fletcher blinked. That would be private business, Mrs. Hunter, of course. She folded her hands on the counter. I'll be paying for our order today in full. Cash, not credit. Fletcher wrote up the order. When she left, she heard him mutter something to himself that sounded like it contained the word finally. She told Levi that evening. All of it, not a softened version, not the version that left out the parts that would make him angry. She told him exactly what had been said, and exactly what she had said back, watching his face while she did it. His jaw had tightened within the first 30 seconds, and had not loosened by the end. He said that to you. It was the flat voice, the controlled one. He did, in Fletcher's store. In front of Fletcher, yes. Levi was standing at the kitchen window with his back half turned, and both hands pressed flat on the windowsill, in a way she was learning to recognize as what he did, instead of putting his fist through something. The water rights dispute, she said. Tell me the actual situation. Not the background version. He turned around. How do you know there's more? Because you gave me background once, 3 weeks ago, in about 40 words, and you said, in the background. Nobody puts something real in the background with 40 words. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down, and she sat down across from him, and he told her the actual version. The creek that ran between their properties had been divided by an agreement made 10 years ago between Levi and the previous owner of Tanner's land, an old man named Walsh, who had been fair-minded and had stuck to the agreement without complaint. When Tanner bought the land 2 years ago, he had immediately challenged the agreement, claimed the water division wasn't legal, that he was entitled to more flow during the dry months, that Levi's upstream usage was cutting into what came down to his cattle. Levi had been to the county office twice. A lawyer in Denver had been consulted. The legal agreement held for now. For now, Sophia repeated. Tanner's got money, and he's willing to spend it on a challenge. The county office has already said they might need to do a formal survey. Levi looked at the table. A formal survey costs money we'd have to find somewhere. How much? $60–70. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She was already going through the accounts in her head. The spring cattle sale that would come in May, the debts that needed servicing, the feed cost she'd just committed to. It's tight, she said, but it's possible if we're careful through winter. That's what I've been figuring. And he said before this year is out. She looked at Levi. That means he's planning to move before spring. Something changed in his eyes. The recalibration again, that thing he did when she got there ahead of where he expected her to be. That's what I'm thinking. Then we need to file preemptively. She kept her voice steady and practical. We file before he challenges, establish our documentation first. Whoever gets their paperwork in first is ahead when the county looks at it. A silence. How do you know that? His voice was careful. My landlady in Cincinnati had a property dispute with her neighbor about a shared wall. She won because she filed first and documented everything first. Sophia folded her hands on the table. The law is slow. Whoever shapes the first record shapes the story. Levi was looking at her with the expression she had come to think of as his real face, not the closed one, not the careful one, but the one underneath that he brought out rarely and seemed not entirely comfortable with. We'd need to go to the county office. I know. I'll come with you. I've been organizing the land records in the ledger. I can pull what we need before we go. He was quiet for a long moment, then Sophia. Yes. The way you handled Tanner today. He stopped, started again. He's made 2 grown men back down in that store. Jim Calloway told me about it. Fletcher never says a word. She met his eyes. I'm not Jim Calloway and I'm not Fletcher. No. Something in his voice that she couldn't quite read. You're not. They went to the county office the following Monday. It was a 2-hour drive, and Levi drove in the early morning quiet with Chester moving at a steady pace and the sky turning from gray to pale gold above them. Sophia had the relevant documents in a satchel on her lap: the original water agreement, the land deed, the letters from the lawyer, the records she had organized from the ledger that showed the ranch's continuous use of the water agreement for 5 years, without challenge. They didn't talk much on the drive, but it was the comfortable version of not talking, which she had learned was different from the careful version. At one point, Chester shied suddenly at something in the road, and Levi's hand shot out automatically and caught her arm before she'd even registered the movement, bracing her against the jolt of the seat. He let go immediately when the wagon steadied. Sorry, he said. Don't apologize. She looked at him sideways. Chester again? There was probably a snake. He hates snakes. Sensible animal. He has a consistent character. I'll give him that. The county office was staffed by a clerk named Harrison, who was thorough and unhurried in equal measure, and who took the documentation Sophia produced with the air of a man who appreciated organized paperwork and did not see it often enough. He read through everything methodically, while she and Levi sat across the desk. You say you believe Mr. Tanner intends to file a formal challenge, Harrison said. We believe it's likely, Sophia said. And you want to file a proactive record of the existing agreement's compliance. We want to file documentation of uninterrupted use and full compliance with the original agreement, yes. Dated and witnessed today. Harrison looked at her over his glasses. You've done this before. No, but I understand the principle. He looked at Levi. Levi looked back at him with the expression that meant he was entirely comfortable with however this was going. Harrison stamped the documentation. He filed it. He gave them a dated receipt. If Mr. Tanner files, he said your record precedes his. Yes, Sophia said. That's correct. Walking back to the wagon, Levi was quiet for half a block. Then, where did you learn to talk to officials like that? I watched Mrs. Holt argue with the city tax office for 2 years. A pause. She always lost, but she always made them work for it. He made the sound again, the short, contained one. This time she was entirely certain it was a laugh. 3 days after the county office visit, someone cut the fence on the east pasture. Not the section that was already damaged from winter. A different section, the one that Levi had just finished repairing. Cut cleanly, with wire cutters, in the middle of the night, so that by morning 6 of his cattle had wandered through the gap and across the boundary onto the road. Levi found it at first light. She heard him from the house, not a shout, just a silence that had a specific quality, the silence of a man finding something that costs him more than money. She was out of the house and across the yard before she had consciously decided to move. She saw the fence. She saw the cattle, already a quarter-mile down the road, and moving at the unhurried pace of animals who feel they're on holiday. She saw Levi standing at the cut fence with his hands at his sides. She didn't ask who had done it. She didn't ask if he was sure. She went back to the barn and saddled her horse she had been learning to ride for 3 weeks with varying success. But this was not a morning for varying success, and came out and looked at him. "Which direction do we go first?" He turned and looked at her on the horse. There was something in his face that she'd remember for a long time afterward, not gratitude exactly, and not surprise exactly, but something that lived in the territory between the two. He went for Chester. They spent 4 hours getting the cattle back. It was not clean work or elegant work. 2 of the steers were stubborn in the particular way of cattle who know they're being corralled and are offended by the presumption. Sophia's horse, a small roan mare named Birdie who was forgiving of her limited skills, handled most of it while Sophia held on and tried to be useful. She fell off once into a stand of dry grass and got up and got back on without stopping to assess the dignity of the situation. When they had all 6 back and the gap was temporarily blocked with the wagon, Levi came and stood beside Birdie and looked up at her. "Are you hurt?" "My pride is damaged." She checked her hands. The left one had a scrape from the fall. Nothing else. He looked at the scrape. His expression shifted into something tight and controlled. "Go inside and put something on that. After the fences." "Sophia." His voice had an edge that was not quite an order and not quite a question. "Go inside." She looked at him for a moment. His jaw was set. The thing that was driving his voice was not about the scrape. "All right," she said quietly. She went inside. She cleaned the scrape. She sat at the table for 5 minutes with her hands flat on the wood and listened to the sound of him working outside the rhythm of it, the particular intensity that comes when a person is doing something physical to contain something emotional. When he came in an hour later, she had coffee on and a plate of food from what there was. He sat down. He ate without speaking. She didn't push. After a while, he put the fork down and said, "It was Tanner. I know, I can't prove it. I know Jim Calloway's coming this afternoon. He saw the wagon going past his property last night, late, moving west. He didn't think anything of it at the time." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "That's not proof, no. But it's a record." He looked at her. "The same way the county filing is a record." She felt something shift in the room, a recognition between them that went beyond the cattle and the fence, and Roy Tanner. "We document it," she said. "Every incident, dated and described. We build a file. Yes, and we're careful. This winter, this fall, we're careful. Yes." She put her hands flat on the table. "Levi, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly." "All right, how bad could this get?" He held her gaze. "The real face version of him, the one underneath," he said. "If Tanner decides to escalate past property harassment, there are things a man with money and a grudge can do in a county where he has friends on the right boards." "Does he have friends on the right boards?" 2 members of the water board are men he's done business with." Sophia held that. "Then we need to be ahead of him every time. Not reactively, every time. That's what I've been thinking." "Stop thinking it alone." Her voice had more edge in it than she intended, and she didn't correct for it. "That was the agreement. We're partners. That means you tell me when you're thinking it, and we think it together." A silence that stretched for 3 full seconds. "You're right," he said. "I know you're right." He stopped, tried again. "I've been managing this alone for 2 years. The habit runs deep." "I know." She let it soften slightly. "I'm not angry at the habit. I'm just telling you to fight it. Fair." His hands were around his coffee cup. "From now on, I'll tell you." She looked at him across the table. The lamp was not lit yet. It was afternoon still, and the light coming in was the flat, steady light of a day with clouds, the kind of light that makes everything look very actual, very present. Nothing softened or prettified. This was what they were building. Not the dream she'd written herself on a train going west. Something harder and less comfortable and more real, a thing that had to be defended and tended and chosen every day. With this man who kept trying to carry everything alone and was slowly, stubbornly learning that he didn't have to. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Outside, the cattle were back where they belonged. The fence needed proper work. Tanner was still out there, waiting for an opening. And Sophia Hunter sat at her kitchen table in the afternoon light and felt, for the first time since she stepped off a train in Millhaven, Colorado, that she was exactly where she had meant to be, and that certainty, fragile as new ice just 2 weeks ago, had begun to harden into something she could stand on. October arrived without apology. The mornings turned cold enough that their breath showed at breakfast, and Levi started banking the fire before he went out to the barn so the house would hold its heat through the day. It was a small thing. He did it without comment, without expecting acknowledgement, and Sophia noticed it the same way she noticed all the small things he did quietly, without making them into more than they were, but keeping them. They had developed a rhythm, the two of them, the kind that forms between people who are paying attention to each other without making a performance of it. She had the ledger and the kitchen and the supply management. He had the cattle and the fences and the edges that kept a working ranch from sliding backward into the ground. But the edges had blurred in the weeks since the fence was cut. She rode out with him twice a week now, more capable on Birdie than she'd been in September, and he had started reviewing the account books with her in the evenings instead of leaving that entirely to her territory. They were building something. She knew it. She thought he knew it too, though he would not have used those words and she had not said them out loud. What she did not know, what neither of them knew, was that Roy Tanner had not been sitting still. The first sign came from an unexpected direction. Dora Prescott caught Sophia at the general store on a Thursday morning and pulled her to the side counter with both the urgency of a woman who has information and intends to deliver it without delay. "There's talk," Dora said without preamble, "about the ranch, about the water rights, specifically about a meeting Tanner had last week with Harlan Briggs." Sophia went still. Harlan Briggs was the head of the county water board. What kind of meeting? The kind that happens at Briggs's house, not at the office, in the evening, and that Briggs's wife mentioned to my neighbor, because she was put out about having to feed a guest on short notice. Dora's eyes were sharp. Tanner brought documents. That's all she knew. Sophia's mind was already moving through what this meant. They had filed their preemptive record 6 weeks ago. Whatever Tanner had brought to Briggs's house, it was a counter to that. A private one, off the official record. "Who else is on the water board?" she asked. "Briggs, Walt Coleman, and Patterson from the east side. Patterson's fair. Coleman does whatever Briggs says. 2-1, if Briggs was in Tanner's pocket. Is there an official complaint process if someone believes the board is acting improperly?" Dora looked at her for a moment. "You'd need to file with the county commissioner. It goes above the board." A pause. "Nobody's done it in the 12 years I've been here. Nobody's had to yet." Sophia picked up her basket. "Thank you, Dora. Tell Levi." "I will." She was back at the ranch by noon, and she told him at the kitchen table with her coat still on because she hadn't wanted to wait. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, the specific quiet of a man organizing what he knows against what he's just been told. "Briggs," he said. "Briggs. He and Tanner both bid on the Alderman parcel 2 years ago. Tanner won it." Levi's jaw shifted. "I always thought Briggs resented that. Apparently I was wrong. Or Tanner found something to offer him that made the resentment easier to swallow." Sophia kept her voice flat and even. "We need to file with the commissioner before they move formally. The commissioner is Ed Hale. He's fair but slow. Then we file today and give him time to be slow." She looked at him directly. "Levi, this is the part where you do not carry it alone." Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, and not quite pain, something that lived in between, which was where most of his true expressions seemed to live. "I know, do you?" He stood up. "Get the documentation. We're going today." They were at the commissioner's office before 3 o'clock. Ed Hale was a deliberate man in his 60s, who listened to everything. Sophia presented with the focused attention of someone who understood the weight of the paperwork in front of him. She laid it out clearly: the original agreement, their preemptive filing, the timeline of the fence cutting, and now the unofficial meeting between Tanner and the board chair. Hale looked at the documents. He looked at Levi. He looked at Sophia. You can't prove the meeting was improper, he said. No, but the record of it exists, and our concerns are now on file with your office, which means any subsequent action by the board will be reviewed in that context. She folded her hands. We're not asking you to act today, Mr. Hale. We're asking you to know. He studied her. You're not from here. No, sir. I'm from Cincinnati. You talk like a lawyer. I talk like a woman who has been paying attention. She met his gaze without blinking. My husband has been managing this dispute alone for 2 years. I've been here for 2 months. I'd like us to still be here in 2 years more. A silence in the room. Hale stamped their complaint. He filed it. He looked at Levi and said, Your wife's got a clearer head than most men who sit in that chair. Levi looked at Sophia and then back at Hale. Yes, he said. She does. Walking back to the wagon, she felt Levi's hand at the small of her back just for a moment as they went through the narrow door, and she knew it was not a possessive gesture or a performative one. It was the kind of thing a person does when they want to mark something real without making a speech about it. She kept walking. She did not comment. She stored at the same place she stored all the small real things. 2 weeks later, the water board sent Levi an official notice of a formal hearing. It was dated the day after their commissioner filing. She read the dates twice and felt the chill of it. Tanner had moved the moment he learned they'd gone above the board. This was retaliation dressed as process. She showed Levi the letter when he came in from the barn. He read it standing in the kitchen with his coat still on and the cold coming off him, and when he finished, he set it down on the table without the careful, controlled stillness she was used to. He sat down heavily in his chair, and for a moment he pressed both hands over his face. And she spaced between one breath and the next, not the managed version of him, but the actual weight of what 5 years of this ranch had cost him. The cattle he'd lost, Clara. The money he'd scraped and saved and put back into land that someone else now wanted to take from him sideways. She did not rush it. She let him have the 30 seconds. Then he took his hands down and looked at her. And she could see him putting the management back on, that long-practiced composure, and she said, Don't. He stopped. Don't close it back up, she said. Not with me. Tell me what it actually feels like. A long silence. Like it's never going to stop, he said finally. His voice was stripped of the careful flatness. Like I build something and someone finds the way to take it apart. And I build it again, and he stopped. His hands were on the table, and she could see the tension in them. I am so tired of fighting for something that should just be mine. She held his gaze. She did not offer comfort that would diminish what he'd said. I know, she said. It's not fair. It has not been fair. And you have been fighting it alone, and that was wrong. Not because you failed at anything, but because no person should have to do this alone, and you were doing it alone. Something in his eyes. You're not alone now, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the letter and read it again. But differently this time, with her beside him instead of just himself. We need a lawyer at the hearing, he said. I know. The one in Denver. He cost $30 for a hearing appearance. I'll find the $30. She was already thinking about the accounts. There's the fall calf sale next week, if we get a fair price on the 3 we're putting up, and I delay the smokehouse roof repair until spring. The smokehouse roof needs doing before winter. Not if we cure the meat in the root cellar instead. It's cold enough now. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks. She saw him starting to argue and kept going. It saves us the repair cost and the curing still gets done. The roof waits until spring when we have more room. He studied her face for a moment. Then you've been sitting on that plan. I was waiting to see if we needed the money. We needed it. I know, that's why I was sitting on it. She leaned forward slightly. Levi, I did not come here to watch this ranch go backward. That is not what I wrote back to your advertisement for. His jaw shifted. Not tension this time, something else. What did you write back for, exactly? The question came out quieter than the others. More careful. She held his gaze and told him the truth. Because you said a real life more than an easy one. And because you said you were looking for someone who wanted to try, if you were both willing. She paused. And because your handwriting was careful. Like a man who took his time. And I thought that's someone who means what he writes. The room was very quiet. I know you did. She pulled the letter toward her. Now let's figure out the hearing. The calf sale happened on a Friday in late October, and Sophia went with him. This was itself something 2 months ago. He had gone to the cattle sale alone, as he had always gone alone, and she had stayed at the ranch because there was enough to do there, and because she had understood, without being told, that he needed to still have some things that were his own process. But the hearing was 6 weeks out, and the money mattered, and she wanted to see how he worked. He worked quietly. That was the thing she hadn't expected, or maybe had expected and had confirmed. He didn't shout prices or banter with the buyers the way some of the men did. He brought his 3 calves in well-fed and well-presented, and he answered questions about their health and history with precise, factual detail, and he held his price with the particular stillness of a man who knows what something is worth and is not in a hurry to be talked out of it. The buyer who tried to lowball him on the second calf met a flat, steady gaze and a silence that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. The buyer came back up $12. Levi took it. Walking back from the pens, Sophia fell into step beside him. You never looked like you were negotiating. Negotiating makes people think there's room to move. If you act like the price is simply the price, they have to decide whether to walk away or pay it. She thought about that. You learned that from watching other men manage badly. I learned it from watching the ones who managed well. He glanced at her sideways. The October light was flat and bright, and it showed his face without softening the lines from years of squinting into sun and wind, the steadiness underneath. You were doing the same thing in the commissioner's office. Was I? You weren't arguing with Hale, you were presenting. Like the case was simply the case. I suppose I was. She hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. Martha Calloway does the same thing. I think I picked it up from her. Martha's been managing Jim for 30 years. She's had practice. Sophia laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, and she felt him glance at her the way he sometimes did when she did something unexpected quickly, and with an attention he didn't advertise. They had the $30 for the lawyer, plus 8 more as a margin. Walking back to the wagon, she thought, we did that together. The accounts, the plan, the sale, the margin, together. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. Jim Calloway arrived at their door on a Sunday with news that changed the shape of everything. His face, when she opened the door, was not the bright-eyed, sociable face of his usual visits. It was the face of a man carrying something he didn't want to carry, and had come to set down because it couldn't wait. She stepped back. Come in. He came in and took his hat off and stood holding it. Levi was at the table with the account books, and he looked up and read Jim's face in about 1 second and stood. What is it? Levi said. I was in town yesterday. Jim turned his hat brim in his hands once, twice, the way a man does when he's choosing his words. I had a drink at the hotel saloon. Tanner was there with 2 men I didn't know. I wasn't close enough to hear everything, but I heard enough. He looked at Levi. He's not just going after the water rights. Silence. What does he want? Levi said. His voice was very flat. He wants the East pasture land. Jim stopped turning his hat. He's been talking to a man from a land company in Denver. A proper land company with lawyers on retainer. He's not going to beat you at the water board. He knows that now since you filed with the commissioner. Jim glanced at Sophia briefly, a glance that understood where that filing had come from. So he's changed the game. He's going to argue the East pasture boundary line was incorrectly surveyed in '82. If he can get the Denver company behind him, they'll fund the legal challenge. It won't be Tanner and the water board. It'll be a land company with unlimited legal resources against a single rancher. The room did not move. Sophia sat down. She needed to think, and she thought better sitting. Levi had not moved at all. He was standing with his hands at his sides, and his face had gone to a place she had not seen before, past the controlled flatness, past the careful management, into something white and still that was the face of a man seeing 5 years of work threatened at the foundation. The survey, she said. Her voice was calm because one of them had to be. The original survey from 1882. Where is it? Levi blinked. Came back to the room. County Records Office. Is there a copy here? In the deed box, in the chest in my room. Get it. She looked at Jim. The 2 men with Tanner, did you know them? No. Dressed well. Not local Denver men then. Already here. That meant Tanner had moved faster than they'd thought. Jim, is there any land surveyor in this county who you would trust? Jim thought for a single second. Tom Aldred. He's been surveying this county since before Tanner was born. He's the one who did the Calloway parcel in '79, and he got it right to the inch. Can you get me a meeting with him this week? I can get you a meeting with him tomorrow if you want it. Levi came back with the deed box. He set it on the table and opened it, and found the survey document rolled and tied, fragile at the edges. The original from 1882. He laid it flat on the table, and they all 3 leaned over it. Sophia studied it. The boundary lines were clearly marked. The east pasture border ran along a creek tributary and was staked at 4 corners, each reference to a fixed geographical point. The surveyor's name at the bottom was not Tom Aldred, it was a man named G. Pierce. Who is G. Pierce? She said. He died in '84, Levi said. Fever, so he can't testify to his own No. She straightened up. This was the problem. The original surveyor was gone, which gave a land company's lawyers room to question the documentation. A challenge of an old survey without a living surveyor to defend it was exactly the kind of legal wedge money could drive. We need Tom Aldred to validate the existing survey, she said. Today's survey has to match the 1,882 boundary perfectly. If it does, Tanner's challenge dies before it starts. You can't dispute a survey that 2 independent professionals agree on across 40 years. Jim was nodding. Levi was looking at the document. It's right, Levi said. His voice was quiet. The boundary is right. I know this land, every corner of it. I know you do. Sophia looked at him. But knowing it and proving it in front of a land company's lawyers are different things. We prove it. She rolled the survey back up carefully. And Jim, she looked at the older man. What you heard in that saloon. Can you write down exactly what you heard, dated today, witnessed? I can do that right now. She got him paper and a pen. He wrote, Levi witnessed it. Sophia dated it and added her name below his. A record. One more record going into the file. He thinks he's going to break us on paperwork, she said, mostly to herself. Jim looked up from the paper. Seems like he miscalculated who he was dealing with. Tom Aldred came out to the ranch on Tuesday. He was a tall, weathered man of 60-something who carried his surveying equipment with the ease of long habit and moved across the land with the specific attentiveness of a man who reads ground the way others read text. Sophia met him in the yard and walked him through what they needed and why, with the document in her hands and the facts laid out plainly. He read the 1,882 survey without comment for a full 2 minutes. G. Pierce, he said. I knew George Pierce. Trained under the same man, different years. He tapped the document. His notation system. I can read this. Can you validate it? Sophia asked. I can survey the boundary and tell you whether the physical markers match what Pierce recorded. He looked at her over the paper. If they match, I'll sign a statement to that effect that would stand in any court in Colorado. And if they don't match, then we have a different conversation. He looked at the land around them, the sweep of it, the particular lay of the east pasture visible from the yard. But Pierce was meticulous. I'd expect them to match. The survey took most of the day. Sophia did not follow Aldred around the property. That was his work, and he didn't need an audience. Instead, she worked in the kitchen and the supply shed and kept moving, because moving was better than sitting still with what they were waiting for. Levi worked the cattle and came in for water twice and said nothing, and she said nothing, and they both understood what the silence meant. At 4 in the afternoon, Tom Aldred knocked on the door. She opened it. The boundaries match, he said. Every corner. Pierce's stakes are still in the ground, the wood is rotted, but the iron pins underneath are exactly where he recorded them. He held out his field notes. I'll write the statement tonight and bring it to you tomorrow. Sophia took the notes. She looked at the numbers on the page, the measurements, the references, the perfect agreement between what a dead man had recorded in 1,882 and what Tom Aldred had found today. Her hand was not entirely steady. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He looked past her into the kitchen, where Levi had just appeared in the doorway. Your land is where you think it is, Hunter. All of it. Levi stood in the doorway, and she heard him exhale just once, controlled, the way he controlled everything, and she knew what that exhale contained. After Aldred left, she turned around. Levi was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and his head down slightly. And she had the clear sense that he was doing the same thing she had been doing all day, holding something together by main force of will, and that the thing had just been given permission to loosen. She crossed the kitchen. She put the survey notes on the table. She stood next to him, close enough that their arms touched, and she did not say anything at all. He didn't move for a moment. Then he unfolded one arm and put it around her shoulders, and she felt the weight of it, not heavy, just present, and she stood there with him in the kitchen doorway, while the October light came through the window and the cattle moved in the pasture, and the ranch continued being theirs. It lasted maybe a minute. Then he straightened and took his arm back and cleared his throat. I'll start on supper, he said. It was the first time he had offered to start supper. All right, she said. She sat at the table and looked at Tom Aldred's field notes and let herself feel just for those few minutes what it meant to have fought for something together and found it still standing. Outside, the wind was picking up. The sky had the particular weighted quality of a sky that is preparing to do something. Neither of them knew yet what October had left to bring. But they were inside the same walls, with the documents on the table and the lawyer's retainer paid and the boundary survey in their hands. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything since that September morning when a wagon rolled through the gate, and she had told him she was terrified but not uncertain. Together, and with their eyes open, that was what they had promised each other, standing in the kitchen doorway with the wind picking up outside, and Tom Aldred's field notes on the table between them. Neither of them knew in that moment that the storm they were bracing for would not arrive the way they expected. It would not come from Roy Tanner's lawyers or the water board or a Denver land company. It would come from the sky itself, and it would come fast, and it would demand from both of them the one thing neither had yet fully given the other. The first snow hit on a Thursday night in early November, 3 weeks before the water board hearing. It was not an ordinary snow. Sofa had lived through Cincinnati winters and understood cold in the way of a person who had managed cold her whole life. You put on more layers, you stayed inside when you could, you endured it until it was over. But this was a different animal. She woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of the wind doing something she had no word for yet. A low continuous roar that was less like wind and more like pressure, like the whole sky leaning down on the roof. She lay still for 10 seconds listening, and then she was up. Levi was already out of his room. She heard him in the kitchen pulling on his coat, and she came out and found him moving with a focused urgency that she had not seen from him before. Not the controlled intensity of the legal fight, but something more physical, more immediate. "The cattle," he said, without looking up from his boots. "The North Pasture Group. I left 8 head out there tonight. The weather turned faster than he stopped. Started over. I need to get them into the barn. I'm coming. Sophia, I'm coming." She was already reaching for her coat. "You cannot move 8 cattle alone in this." He looked at her. For exactly 1 second his face said everything about wanting to argue and deciding not to. "Dress warm. Everything you have." It was the worst thing she had experienced in her body since arriving in Colorado. The cold was not a temperature, it was a force, a thing with weight and intention that pushed against her chest and made her eyes water before she'd gone 10 steps from the porch. The wind was not constant, but rather gusting in irregular patterns that were somehow worse than if it had simply blown steady, because every time it dropped she started to feel like she could manage it, and then it slammed back, and she had to start over. Levi had a rope tied from the house to the barn, and she understood immediately why without it, in the dark and the driving snow, a person could lose their bearings in their own yard. She held the rope with one hand and kept moving. In the barn, Chester was moving in his stall, and the other horses were unsettled, shifting and snorting. Levi went straight through and out the back without stopping. She followed. The north pasture was a quarter-mile from the barn. It felt like 5 miles. She couldn't see him half the time. He was 3 feet ahead of her, and the snow reduced visibility to almost nothing. She kept moving toward the sound of him, and when she couldn't hear him, she kept moving in the direction they'd been going and told herself not to stop. They found the cattle huddled at the north fence line, pressing against each other for warmth, miserable and resistant to being moved in the way of animals who have decided that staying put is safer than following a human into the white. Levi worked the outside of the group, and she worked the inside, following his lead, doing what he did, and she had spent enough weeks learning the cattle to understand their logic and where to stand and what sound to make. It took 40 minutes to move 8 cattle a quarter mile in a blizzard. When the last one was in the barn, and Levi pulled the door shut behind them, Sophia sat down on a hay bale and put her hands on her knees and concentrated on breathing. Her hands inside her gloves had gone past cold into a particular numbness she did not entirely trust. Her face hurt. Her legs hurt. Levi crouched in front of her and pulled her gloves off and held her hands between both of his. "Can you feel these?" She flexed her fingers. The movement was stiff and slow. Mostly. He pressed her hands harder between his, applying direct warmth. His own hands were cold, but not as cold as hers. He had done this before, she realized, and had kept moving, which was what you did. She had stopped. "Don't stop moving in a storm like this," he said. "Even when you're exhausted, keep the blood going." "I know that now. I should have told you before. You didn't know I'd be out in it." She looked at him, at his face, close to hers in the barn light, still focused and worried, and doing that thing of managing his expression, while the actual thing was visible anyway. Underneath. Are they all right, the cattle? They'll be fine. Cold and offended, but fine. He looked down at her hands. The flexion was coming back. Sophia, I need you to tell me if anything is wrong with your hands or feet. Not later now. They're coming back. I can feel the tingling. She demonstrated by wiggling her fingers, which worked. See, he released her hands but didn't move away. He was still crouching in front of her, close enough that she could see the melting snow on his collar and eyelashes, and his face was doing the thing she had come to know better than she knew most things in this world, that specific struggle between what he felt and what he had been trained by years of solitude to keep to himself. You could have been lost, he said. In that, without the rope to the barn, you could have. But I wasn't. No, but you could have Levi. She put both her recovering hands on either side of his face, which surprised him enough to stop him talking. His skin was cold and rough, and she held it anyway. I'm here. I'm fine, we got them in. She looked at him directly. That's what happened. He was very still, I know, he said. His voice had come down to almost nothing. I know that's what happened. She let her hands drop. He straightened up. The moment passed in the way that moments do when two people choose, mutually and without discussion, to let something settle rather than push it into words it wasn't ready for. We should get back to the house. Yes. He helped her up from the hay bale. He kept her hand until they were through the barn door, and had the rope in hand, and then he kept it anyway, all the way back to the house. Because the wind was still doing that thing, and because neither of them felt the need to make a point about it. The storm lasted 2 days. They were inside most of it, and the inside of those 2 days was something Sophia would carry with her for the rest of her life, in the specific way of things that happen before you know what they mean, and only become clear afterward. They talked. Not the careful, strategic conversations about the legal fight or the ranch finances, though those happened too. They talked the way people talk when they're stuck inside, together with the wind making a wall of noise outside, and there is nowhere to be and nothing urgent pressing, and the usual defenses feel slightly beside the point. He told her about his mother, a small, determined woman named Ruth, who had grown tomatoes in the worst soil in Kansas and had opinions about everything, and had once argued with a circuit preacher for 45 minutes about the interpretation of a specific Bible passage and won. Sophia recognized something in this description and said so, and he looked at her sideways and said, "She would have argued with you too, and she would have liked that about you." 2 women he'd cared about, she thought, who would have argued with her and liked her for it. She understood something then about what he had been looking for when he wrote that advertisement, not someone obedient, not someone easy, but someone who would push back. She told him about her mother, the real version, not the edited one she'd given the letters, the woman who had been funny and stubborn, and who had worked herself into an early grave at 42 because she had no one to help her carry the weight. Sophia told him about the last winter, the one where she'd watched her mother get smaller and smaller while the laundry work got heavier and heavier, and how she had been 18 years old and completely helpless to stop it. He listened. He did not offer comfort that would diminish it. He said, "She worked that hard because she was trying to make sure you'd be all right." I know, Sophia's voice was steady but only barely. I know that. It doesn't make it easier. It doesn't. A pause. But it means she succeeded. You're all right. She looked at the window, the white and gray of the storm outside, the complete enclosure of it. I didn't feel all right for a long time. You don't look like someone who is only all right. She turned to look at him. What do I look like? He considered the question with the seriousness he gave all questions. Someone who decided what kind of person she was going to be, and then became it. A pause. That's not a common thing. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked away, because the alternative was to say something she wasn't sure either of them was ready to say. On the second night of the storm, she woke again at 2 in the morning, not from any noise, but from the quality of the silence. The wind had dropped. She lay still and listened to the ranch settling into quiet around her, and felt, for the first time since arriving in Colorado, something that was not determined or forward-facing or braced for what came next. She felt at home. Not comfortable. The bed was still too narrow, and the room was still cold, and there was still a land dispute and a water board hearing, and Roy Tanner somewhere out there calculating his next move. But home. The difference between a place you are trying to make work and a place that has quietly, without your noticing, become the place you would not choose to leave. She closed her eyes and slept. When the storm cleared, the damage revealed itself slowly, the way damage always does. The smokehouse roof had not survived the weight of the snow combined with the wind had taken the section she'd already planned to delay, and taken it badly, splitting two of the main supports. Levy stood looking at it the morning after the storm, with his hands in his pockets, and said nothing for a long time. "How much to repair it properly?" Sophia asked. $20 in materials if I do the labor myself." "How long?" 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather holds. She was already recalculating. $20 was their legal margin, the $8 they'd held back past the lawyer's fee. "We use the margin," she said. "That leaves us nothing in reserve for the hearing costs." "The hearing costs are filing fees. We've already paid them." She turned to face him. "The meat needs to be cured, Levi. The smokehouse is how we store it for winter. We can't eat illegal filing." He almost smiled. "That's a practical argument. I am a practical person." She put her hands in her own pockets against the cold. "Start on the roof today. I'll figure the numbers." He started on the roof that afternoon. She brought him coffee at intervals, and occasionally held things while he worked, not as oversight but as presence, and he accepted it in the same way she'd learned. He accepted most things she offered quietly, without making a production of it. On the second day of roof repairs, Jim Calloway arrived with his son Daniel and a wagon load of lumber. Levi stopped working and looked at the lumber. "I was saving that for my own repairs," Jim said, cheerfully, from the wagon seat. And then, "I thought, Levi needs it more." And Martha agreed. "So, here we are." Jim Levi's voice had that particular quality of a man trying to refuse something he needs. "Don't," Jim said. "I have a speech prepared about how many times you've helped me fix things on my property, and I will deliver the whole thing if you make me." It's about 12 minutes long, and Daniel has already heard it twice. Daniel, a young man of about 20, nodded with the resigned expression of someone who had indeed heard the speech. Levi looked at the lumber, looked at Jim. The thing he had about carrying things alone was visibly, physically present. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the slight tension in his jaw. She had seen it every time someone tried to help him, and she had watched him fighting it, incrementally, since she arrived. "Thank you," he said. It came out a little rougher than he intended, which she thought meant it was genuine. Jim climbed down from the wagon. "There. Was that so hard?" "Yes. Good. It should be a little hard. Keeps you from taking it for granted." He clapped Levi on the shoulder and started unloading lumber. Daniel jumped down to help. Sophia went to put more coffee on because there were now 4 people working instead of 2, and the morning was cold and she was glad, she was deeply, uncomplicated glad that they were not alone in this. The roof was finished in a day and a half. The water board hearing was set for the 3rd Tuesday of November. The lawyer from Denver, a compact, sharp-minded man named Arthur Reeves, who had the organized precision of a man who billed by the hour and intended to earn it, arrived in Millhaven the day before the hearing and fished with Fifi Levi at the hotel for 2 hours. She had prepared a file. She had been preparing it for weeks, every document, every notation. The commissioner filing, Tom Aldred's survey validation, Jim Calloway's witnessed statement about the saloon conversation, the dated records of the fence cutting, every letter ever exchanged with the county office, organized chronologically and by subject, with a summary she had written herself across the first 2 pages that laid out the full picture in plain sequential language. Reeves picked up the summary and read it without speaking. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. "Did you write this?" "Yes. This is better than half the briefs my junior partners produce." He wasn't flattering her. His voice was half actual, slightly irritated, as if the observation required him to recalibrate something. He looked at Levi. "Your wife has organized this case." "I know," Levi said. "You're aware that what she's assembled here effectively eliminates most of the board's grounds for challenging your agreement, even with Tanner's lawyers involved." "That was the intention," Sophia said. Reeves looked back at her. "You've done this before?" "No. But I understand what a record is for." She kept her voice even. "You can't argue against a history you didn't get to shape. We shaped it first." He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the full file and opened it at the Aldred survey validation. "Walk me through your surveyor's findings." She walked him through it. He asked 6 questions. She answered 5 directly and said, "I don't know." But here is the document that covers it for the 6th, which was, she thought, the most honest possible response, and he seemed to agree. Levi said almost nothing during the 2 hours. He watched her. She was aware of him watching, not checking on her, not anxiously monitoring, but paying attention the way he paid attention to things he was trying to understand fully. Afterward, leaving the hotel, she felt his hand at her back again, brief and deliberate, the same as after the commissioner's office. She had stopped trying not to notice. "Reeves thinks we'll win," she said on the street. "Reeves is confident he's right to be." She looked up at him. "We built this. The file, the survey, the commissioner record. We built it from nothing, in 2 months, while also running a ranch in a bad fall. Reeves is just the person who stands up and presents it." He looked at her for a long moment. The evening was cold, and the street was mostly empty, and his face in the particular light of a Colorado November dusk was not controlled or careful or managed. It was just his face. "I need to tell you something," he said. Her heart did something she didn't direct it to do. "All right, when I wrote that advertisement," he stopped, started over. "I wrote it because the ranch needed a partner. That was true. But I also wrote it," because he paused, with the deliberateness of a man choosing words, like a man choosing where to put his feet on uncertain ground. "Jim Calloway told me I was disappearing. He said I was becoming someone who only existed in relation to the work and nothing else. He said it directly and more than once, and I told him he was wrong." A pause. "He wasn't wrong," she waited. "I am not good at this," he said. His voice was quiet and completely honest. "I am not a man who finds the words easily. I never have been, I know that. What I want to say is," he looked at her face, directly, the way he looked at things he was taking seriously. "You are not what I expected when I wrote those letters. You were considerably more than I knew how to ask for. And I think I knew that by the end of the first week, and I have not found the right way to say it until now." The street was very quiet. Sophia looked at him, at the careful, honest, difficult man who had written her letters in plain handwriting, because he took his time and didn't waste words, and who had been slowly, painstakingly unfolding since the day she arrived, one small true thing at a time. "You have been saying it," she told him. "The coffee on the stove before you went out. The way you held my hands in the barn. Driving to the commissioner's office the same day I asked you to." She kept her eyes on his. "You have been saying it in every way except words. I heard it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. That particular nod, she had learned, meant something had settled in him, gone from the uncertain column to the certain one. "Good," he said. She agreed. They walked back to the wagon. The cold was sharp and clean, and the stars were beginning to show in the darkening sky. She took his arm, and he let her. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Roy Tanner sat on one side of the room with 2 men in good suits who had the polished confidence of lawyers who expected to win. Harlan Briggs ran the proceeding from the front with the careful neutrality of a man who knew Commissioner Hale was watching and was adjusting his behavior accordingly. Reeves presented their case in 65 minutes. He used every document in the file. He quoted Tom Aldred's survey validation at length. He introduced Jim Calloway's witnessed statement about the saloon conversation. He presented the commissioner filing, dated 6 weeks before the formal challenge, establishing clearly that the hunters had documented their position first. Tanner's lawyers objected 3 times. Reeves had an answer for each objection that was grounded directly in the record Sophia had built. At one point, Briggs, who had been maintaining his careful neutrality, asked a question that was slightly too pointed, a question that revealed which side of the outcome he preferred. Sophia watched Arthur Reeves pause, look at Briggs, and then refer directly to the commissioner, filing by date and number, which had the effect of reminding everyone in the room that Commissioner Hale was aware of this proceeding. Briggs did not ask another pointed question. When Tanner's lawyers presented their challenge to the original survey, Reeves put Tom Aldred's validation on the table and said simply, "The 1882 survey has been independently validated within the last month by a surveyor with 40 years of experience in this county. The boundary markers are exactly where they were recorded to be. There is nothing to challenge." The room was quiet. Sophia sat beside Levi with her hands folded and her face calm and felt his knee press briefly against hers under the table. She pressed back. The board deliberated for 30 minutes. The agreement stood. Levi Hunter's water rights were confirmed. The east pasture boundary was not to be reopened for challenge without new physical evidence, of which there was none. Roy Tanner stood up and walked out before the chair finished reading the decision. His lawyers gathered their papers with the contained efficiency of men who were already thinking about their fees and their next case. Outside the hearing room, Jim Calloway, who had attended as a witness, and had been sitting in the back row, came forward and shook Levi's hand and then, without any ceremony, embraced him, which Levi endured with the expression of a man who is genuinely moved and genuinely uncomfortable in about equal measure. "I told you," Jim said, releasing him. "Didn't I tell you?" "You tell me many things, Jim. Most of them right." He turned to Sophia. He took her hand in both of his and held it. "Martha wants you to come for dinner on Sunday," he said. "She made me promise to tell you that it is not a request." Sophia laughed. It felt so good to laugh that she had to stop herself from doing it too long. "Tell Martha Sunday is perfect." They drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon. The legal fight was over. The ranch was intact, the water rights confirmed, the boundary settled. Tanner was still out there and still capable of being difficult, but the legal avenues he'd been counting on were closed. He was a man who worked through leverage, and he had run out of leverage. Levi drove in his usual silence, but it was the deep, settled silence of someone from whom a weight had been removed, not the careful silence of someone managing what they held. Chester moved at his steady pace, and the afternoon light came down golden and low the way it does in November, that particular slant that makes everything look both older and more permanent. Sophia sat beside him with her hands in her lap and let the quiet be what it was. At some point, without looking at her, he said, "The east pasture fence. The new section I put up in September. What about it? I want to expand it. Take in another 20 acres on the north side. I looked at it last spring, but I couldn't justify the cost alone." A pause. "With the accounts the way they are now, the way you've managed them, I think we could do it by spring." She looked at the side of his face. "Expand the herd? By 10 head, maybe 12. There's a stockman in the next county selling quality cattle at fair prices in the spring. Jim knows him." She thought about the numbers. She had them arranged in her head now, the way she had learned to arrange them, not as fixed facts, but as a system with movable parts. "If we carry through winter carefully, and the spring calves come in strong," she ran through it. "Yes, possibly. It would need both of us figuring it." "Of course it would." She looked at the road ahead, and then at him. "Levi, is that what you're asking? That we plan this together?" He looked at her briefly. "Back at the road. That's what I'm asking." "Then yes." She turned forward. "We'll figure it in November. Have a plan by December. Move on it in March." The wagon rolled on. Chester flicked an ear. "There's one more thing," Levi said. Something in his tone made her still. The house. He kept his eyes on the road, but his jaw had the careful set of a man saying something he has been working himself toward. "It's too small. I always knew it was too small. I built it to get started, not to." He stopped. "Began. Next spring when the fence is done. I want to add the back room properly. Make it real. A kitchen that works better, and the front room larger," and he paused. "If that's something you want." She understood what he was saying. Not just the rooms. Not just the building. What he was saying underneath the building. He was saying next spring. He was saying, "I am planning a future that has you in it. Not as a partner who might stay, but as a fact. As someone who is simply there, the same way the ranch is there, the same way he is there." She felt something happen in her chest that she had been waiting for since September, without knowing what shape it would take. "Yes," she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely certain. "That's something I want." The nod that meant settled. They rode the last mile to the ranch in the fading afternoon light, side by side, not saying anything, because nothing needed saying. The cattle were in the pasture where they belonged. The fence line was intact. The legal papers were in the satchel behind the seat, with Tanner's challenge dead inside them. When the house came into view, their house, small and plain and solid against the evening sky, Sophia looked at it and felt none of the fear she had felt the first time she saw it. She felt something that had no clean name, something that was made of work and weather, and two people choosing, every day, to be in the same direction. Levi brought the wagon to a stop in the yard and set the brake. He got down and came around and offered her his hand, the same way he had on the first day. She took it, the same way she had. But the hands were different now they knew each other, and the knowing was in the grip, and neither of them let go right away. "Hungry?" he asked. "Starving," she said. He smiled. Not the almost smile, not the suggestion of one. A real smile, brief and complete, the kind that changes a face entirely for a moment and then is gone. She had waited a long time for that smile, and she thought she would probably keep waiting for it, and keep being glad when it arrived. For a very long time to come, and standing in the yard of the Hunter Ranch on a cold November evening with her hand still in his, Sophia understood that this was not the end of something. It was the beginning of the part that actually counted. Winter settled over Millhaven like a deliberate thing. Not the violent drama of the November storm, but the long, patient cold of December and January, the kind that requires a different type of endurance, not courage exactly, but persistence. The willingness to do the same necessary things every day without the adrenaline of crisis to push you through. Sophia had not known this kind of endurance before Colorado. In Cincinnati, the winters were things you survived indoors. Here, the work continued regardless. The cattle still needed feeding. The water troughs still froze and needed breaking every morning before dawn. Firewood still needed splitting and stacking and carrying. She learned to do all of it, some of it badly at first and then better, and some of it by January. Well enough that Levi stopped showing her how and simply worked alongside her. That was the measure she used, not praise, because he was not a man who praised easily, but the moment when the instruction stopped and the partnership took its place. The evenings were the part she had not expected to love as much as she did. The workday ended and the house contracted around the two of them, and the lamp went on, and the fire settled into its steady burn, and they were simply two people in the same space, doing the things people do when the day is over. She read. He read. She worked on the ledgers. He mended tack or sharpened tools, or sometimes and looked at the fire with the particular stillness of a man who knew how to be in silence without being lonely. That had changed. She knew it and she thought he knew it. The silence between them was not the careful silence of the first weeks, the managed, "we are not yet sure of each other" silence. It was the silence of two people who had stopped performing comfort and had started actually feeling it. On a Thursday evening in late December, she looked up from the ledger and said, "We're going to be all right." He looked up from his book. He waited, financially, through winter and into spring. She turned the ledger toward him. "If the spring calves come in at a fair rate and we buy the 20 additional acres before the price goes up in March, by next fall we'll be running 60 head and the accounts will have a real margin for the first time." He looked at the numbers. He was better with the ledger. Now she had taught him her notation system, and he had learned it with the methodical patience he brought to everything practical. "You've factored in the building costs. The backroom addition." "Yes. I moved it to late spring, April or May, which gives us the winter accounts to stabilize first." He studied the page. "You moved the addition." "I moved it 3 weeks to accommodate the cattle purchase." "You said the cattle come first." She kept her voice even. "Was I wrong?" "No." He looked up. Something in his face she couldn't entirely decode. I said that in passing. I didn't think you'd work it into the numbers." "Everything you say in passing goes into the numbers, Levi. That's what managing accounts means." She took the ledger back. "The addition will happen. It'll just happen in April." He was quiet for a moment. "Sophia, the addition," he set his book down flat. "I want to be clear about what I meant when I said it." She put her pencil down. "I meant a proper house," he said. "A house that is ours. Not the structure I built to get started. Something that was built for what we actually are." He met her eyes. "I want you to tell me what you want in it. Not just the practical things. What you actually want." She held very still. In 6 months of marriage, she had been asked what she needed many times, what she needed for the accounts, for the kitchen, for the cattle management, for the legal fight. She had not been asked what she wanted. The distinction was not small. "A window on the south wall in the kitchen," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "The light is better in the afternoons from that side. And a proper shelf for the books, yours and mine both, not just yours on that one shelf." She paused. "And the room off the back. A real room, not a storage space with a cot." "For what?" She looked at him. She had thought about this for 3 months without saying it. "Eventually, if things stay as they are." She held his gaze. "A child's room, Levi." The room went very still. He looked at her with the real face, the one underneath, and she watched something move across it that was complicated and layered and not entirely settled. Something that had to do with Clara, with loss, with the particular terror of wanting something again, after wanting something had cost him everything. She did not rush him. She had learned the rhythm of his processing. He needed the room to turn things over, and he needed to know she wouldn't push before he was ready. "Yes," he said finally. His voice was rough. "Yes. We'll build that room." She picked up her pencil. "Good. I'll put it in the spring plan." She went back to the ledger. He went back to his book. But the room felt charged with something that had been said and received and settled into the foundation of what they were becoming. New Year came and went without ceremony. which suited both of them. Jim and Martha came for a meal on New Year's Eve, and they sat around the table until late with good food and the kind of conversation that moves easily between serious and ridiculous, the way it does between people who know each other well enough to hold both at once. Jim told 3 stories, one about a cattle drive in his youth that became increasingly implausible as the evening went on, one about a dispute between 2 Millhaven families over a rooster that had apparently generated genuine legal proceedings, and one about Levi's first year on the ranch that made Levi put his hand over his eyes and made Sophia laugh until her eyes watered. Walking to the door at the end of the evening, Martha held both of Sophia's hands for a moment. "You look different than September," Martha said. Not as a question. "I feel different." Yes. Martha studied her face with the calm, comprehensive attention that was her particular gift. "You look like someone who has stopped wondering if they belong here and started simply belonging." She released her hands. "It suits you." After the Callaways left, Sophia stood in the front room listening to Levi bank the fire for the night. A new year. She had arrived in September with $11 and a suitcase and a name on a piece of paper, and she was standing in her own house on the first night of a new year, with a ledger that showed a solvent ranch on an upward trajectory and a plan for a south-facing kitchen window and a room that did not yet exist but would. She had not come here to be saved. She had known that when she wrote the first letter, she had come here to build something, because the alternative was to let herself be slowly erased by a life that had no room for who she actually was. She had built something. They had built something. Together, January brought its own test, the way every month seemed to have one. The letter arrived on a Tuesday from a law firm in Denver that she did not recognize. She opened it at the table before Levi came in, and she read it twice, and by the time she heard his boots on the porch, she had read it a third time and had her voice ready. He came through the door and saw her face and stopped. "What is it?" She held up the letter. "Roy Tanner sold his land." He stared at her. "What?" "The letter is from a firm handling the sale. They're notifying adjacent landowners." She set it on the table. "He sold the entire parcel to a private buyer from Kansas." Levi crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and picked up the letter. He read it. He read it again. She watched his face go through the same sequence. Hers had disbelief, then calculation, then something more complicated. "He sold it," Levi said. "After losing the hearing and the commissioner challenge, and the survey validation, yes." She kept her voice steady, but she felt the magnitude of it, the sheer sudden absence of the thing they had been bracing against for 4 months. "He cut his losses and sold." Levi set the letter down slowly. He put both hands flat on the table. His head was down. She couldn't see his face. "Levi." His eyes were bright in the way of a man who will not cry but has come to the edge of the territory. "It's over. Yes, he's gone. Yes." She stood up and crossed to where he was standing and put her arms around him, which was not something she had done before, in quite this way, not comfort touch, not the brief contact of hands or a shoulder, but fully, her arms around him and her face against his shoulder, the embrace of 2 people who have been through something together and have come out the other side. He went still for a second. Then his arms came around her, and he held on with a force that told her exactly how much the past 4 months had cost him to carry. They stood like that in the kitchen for a long minute. When she stepped back, his hands moved to her face before she'd gone far, framing it, and he looked at her with everything visible, and nothing managed, and said, "I don't know how to," and stopped. "You don't have to," she said. He kissed her. It was not a tentative thing or an uncertain thing. It was the kiss of a man who had been working his way toward something for a long time, and had finally decided that he was done working and was simply going to arrive. She kissed him back with the same certainty, and when they separated, she felt his forehead come down against hers, and the 2 of them stood like that, breathing, in the kitchen of their house on a January afternoon, with the Tanner letter on the table, and 4 months of fighting behind them, and everything else ahead. "I should have done that before now," he said. "Yes. You should have. I was working your way toward it." "I know." She felt him laugh, actually felt it against her forehead. "You got here, Levi. That's what matters." February came in cold and left quietly. The new buyer of the Tanner land turned out to be a man named George Whitfield, who arrived in March to assess his property and introduced himself at the Millhaven General Store with the manner of a man who wanted to be a decent neighbor and was prepared to put in the effort required. He came to the Hunter Ranch the 2nd week of March with his hat in his hand and a jar of something his wife had sent, and he and Levi talked for an hour about the Water Creek and the boundary line, and the existing agreement with a ease that made the previous 2 years feel like a very expensive bad dream. "I have no interest in legal disputes," Whitfield said, with the directness of a man who had heard enough about the previous owner's activities to know exactly what he was distancing himself from. "I bought land to run cattle on it. The water agreement your wife documented is fair, and I intend to honor it." Levi shook his hand, and Sophia offered coffee, and George Whitfield drank it and told them about his family and his cattle operation in Kansas. And by the time he left the Hunter Ranch, had a neighbor for the first time in 2 years instead of an adversary. Sophia stood in the yard watching his wagon go. Levi came to stand beside her. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. She turned to look at him. "Are you going to say I told you so?" "About what?" "Filing preemptively. Building the record. Going to the commissioner before Tanner moved." She watched his face. "You doubted it at the time." "I didn't doubt it." He paused, looked at the road where Whitfield's wagon was still visible. "I was afraid to hope it would work." "There's a difference." "There is." She considered him. "Are you afraid to hope now?" He turned to look at her directly. The March light was cold and clear, and it showed him exactly as he was the lines of his face, the steadiness in him, the thing underneath the steadiness that she had spent 6 months learning to read. He said, "Not anymore." The building started in April. Levi hired 2 men from town to help with the framing and the heavy work, and Jim Calloway's son Daniel came twice a week because he was learning construction, and because Jim had volunteered him with the cheerful authority of a man who runs his household on the principle that good neighbors share labor. Sophia worked alongside them, not construction work, but the 100 adjacent things that construction requires, the organization of materials, and the feeding of workers, and the decisions that had to be made daily about what went where and why. The south-facing kitchen window went in on the 4th day. She was in the kitchen when they cut the opening, and the afternoon light came through for the first time, and she stopped what she was doing and stood in it. Just stood in it for a moment. The way you stand in something you have been waiting for long enough that its arrival is slightly unreal. Levy came through the door and found her standing in the light. He didn't say anything. He came to stand beside her, and they both looked at the light coming through the new window and then at each other, and she thought, "This is what it looks like." Not the romance she had read about in the books she'd borrowed from the Cincinnati library, nothing dramatic or ornate. Just this, 2 people building a window together and standing in the light it let in. "It's right," she said. Yes, his voice was quiet. "It's right." The room at the back, the room she hadn't named out loud since December, went up in the last week of April. Levi built most of it himself, after the hired men were gone for the day, working in the evenings with a lamp and a deliberateness that she recognized as the way he did things that mattered to him most. She heard him out there after supper, the sound of it steady and careful, and she did not interrupt. One evening she brought him coffee and stood in the doorway of the new room, properly framed now, walls plastered, the window in the west wall that got the evening light, and looked at what he had built. "It's a good room," she said. He was on his knees checking a floorboard. He looked up. "It will be when it's needed." He held her gaze. "When it's needed." She went back to the kitchen and sat down with her letters, the one she wrote and never sent in, and she opened to a new page and wrote one that was different from all the others. Not to her mother, or to the old version of herself, or to the shapeless future. She wrote to the person she was now, in this house, on this ranch, in this life. She wrote, "I am not who I was when I arrived here. I am someone who was made by this place and this man and this work and this fight and this winter and this spring. I am someone I did not know I was going to be, and I think she is who I was always supposed to become." She folded it and put it in the back of the ledger with the others. But this time she knew she would keep it. May arrived with warmth and new calves and the smell of turned earth from the expanded kitchen garden. They bought 22 acres on the north side, in the first week 2 more than planned. Because the price was right and the accounts supported it. Levi made the decision at the land office and looked at her across the desk before he signed, and she nodded once and he signed. That was how they made decisions now, not one person deferring to the other, not one person carrying it, but both of them reading the same information and coming to the same place. The spring cattle sale brought in more than she had projected by $11. She told him at supper, and he looked at the number and said, "How?" And she said, "The 3 calves we held through winter were heavier at sale than if we'd sold them in fall." And he looked at her and said, "You planned that." And she said, "I thought it was likely." I didn't know. And he said, you planned it. And there was something in his voice that was not quite pride, and not quite wonder, but lived in the territory between the two. And she let herself feel it, because she had earned it. Jim Calloway came in June with news that Roy Tanner had been seen in a town 60 miles east trying to file a complaint against a different rancher over a different water dispute, and that he had been turned down by that county's commissioner in short order. Leopard, Jim said with satisfaction. Spots, Sophia agreed. Levi looked at both of them. Are you going to explain that? No, Jim said. Ask Martha. The moment that Sophia would remember longest came on a July evening, 6 days after she had told Levi she was going to have a child. He had received that news in the way he received most significant things, with a stillness that lasted long enough to be alarming if you didn't know him, followed by something breaking through the stillness that was undeniable and large. His hands had gone to her face the same way they had the January day. Tanner sold his land, framing it, steadying it, as if making sure it was real. He had said her name once, just that, and she had said, yes, it's real. And he had sat down slowly, and she had sat beside him, and he had taken her hand and held it with the particular grip of a man who is apprised by something he realizes he had been hoping for, without allowing himself to know he was hoping for it. That was 6 days ago. Now they were sitting on the porch in the July evening, the heat of the day beginning to release into the cooler night air, and the cattle moving quietly in the far pasture, and the sound of the ranch doing what ranches do when the people on them have done their work and the day is done. Levi was sitting with one arm around her shoulders, and she was leaning into his side, which was how they sat on the porch now, unremarkably, the way people who have been sharing their life for long enough that the gesture requires no explanation. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I'm thinking about the room, the back room, yes. She felt the steadiness of him, the warmth of it against her side. I'm thinking it's ready, before it's needed. You built it carefully. I built it for something specific. His voice was low. I knew that when I was building it, even when we hadn't talked about it yet. A pause. Clara and I talked about a family. We talked about it. And then there was no time and I put it away. All of it, the wanting of it, she didn't move. She let him have the space. I didn't think I was going to get to want it again, he said. I made my peace with that, or I thought I had. He shifted slightly. You arrived and I understood about a month in that I had not actually made my peace with it. I had just stopped looking at it. And now I am looking at it. His arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. And it looks like something I can hold without dropping. She pressed closer to his side. She did not trust her voice for a moment. When she had it back, you're not going to drop it. No quiet certainty, I'm not. They sat in the July evening while the light went slowly from gold to rose to the deep, comfortable blue of a clear sky dusk. Chester was visible in the paddock, standing at his preferred corner, probably having opinions about the evening, which he did at all hours. The new fence line on the north boundary stood solid against the last of the light, the 22 acres beyond it already feeding the additional cattle they'd bought in spring. A ranch that had been losing ground for 5 years. A man who had been disappearing into solitude, one season at a time. A girl who had stepped off a train in September with a suitcase and $11 and a decision she could not reverse. Sophia thought about the letter she had written to herself in May, about who she had been and who she had become. She thought about the woman her mother was, and the woman she herself was becoming, not a smaller, ground-down version of a full life, but the actual full life, with its difficulty and its beauty and its work and its love and its permanent, daily requirement that she be entirely present in it. She thought about walking out of a train station in Millhaven, Colorado, into an afternoon that smelled like dust and horses and coal smoke, and seeing a man at the far end of the platform who was standing still in a crowd, not pushing forward, just waiting, watching, prepared to be surprised. She had not known then what he was. She knew now. The child was born in February, in the back room that Levi had built with his own hands. They named her Ruth for his mother. Sophia had suggested it, and Levi had gone very quiet for a moment and then said yes in a voice that required no elaboration. Martha Calloway attended the birth with the competent calm of a woman who had done this before, and was not interested in drama, only in the mother and the child and the outcome, which was good. Levi paced the front room for 6 hours with the particular controlled tension of a man who is managing something he cannot control and doing it badly, which Sophia would have found funny if she had been in any position to find anything funny, which she was not. When Martha brought him in to see them, mother and daughter, both present, both real, he stood in the doorway of the room he had built and looked at the two of them and did not move for a long moment. Ruth was very small and very certain of her own existence and was making this known. Levi crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, and Sophia put Ruth in his arms, which was the most uncertain she had seen him since September, and then the least uncertain, within about 10 seconds, because he held the child with the instinctive steadiness of a man who does not drop things he's decided to hold. He looked up at Sophia. She looked back at him. There were no words sufficient to the moment, and neither of them tried. He reached out and took her hand, the hand that wasn't holding Ruth, and held it, and she held back, and the three of them were in the room he had built, before he knew what it was for, which was this. Exactly this. 1 year after Sophia Bennett stepped off a train in Millhaven, Colorado, she stood at the south-facing kitchen window and watched her husband walk in from the north pasture with their daughter on his arm, and Jim Calloway beside him. Talking Jim was always talking, and Levi was listening with the patience that was his particular gift, and Ruth was watching the cattle with the focused attention of a child who has already decided that the world is primarily interesting. Sophia had flour on her hands and a ledger open on the table, and the kitchen smelled like the bread she'd started an hour ago and the coffee that had been on since morning. She thought about who she had been when she stepped off that train. The girl who had been terrified but not uncertain. The girl who had told him those were different things. She had been right about that. And she had been right about everything that followed from it, that the uncertainty she didn't have was more important than the fear she did. That a real life was worth more than an easy one. That a man who meant what he wrote was worth crossing 600 miles to find. Levi looked up from whatever Jim was saying and saw her at the window. He stopped walking for just a moment. He held her gaze across the yard, across the fence he'd built, and the pasture they'd expanded, and the land they'd defended, and the life they'd made, and he did the thing with his mouth that she had learned to read better than any words he'd ever written. The real smile, brief and complete just for. She raised her flour-dusted hand at the window. He raised his free hand back. That was all. That was everything. The girl who had arrived with nothing but fear had built the only thing that had ever mattered, not out of luck or rescue or someone else's courage, but out of her own. And the cowboy who everyone had underestimated had turned out to be exactly what she had read in those careful, plain-handed letters. A man who meant what he said, kept what he promised, and had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone who would stay. They had found each other at the end of a 600-mile journey neither of them could have planned, on a platform in a dusty Colorado town, and they had chosen every single day since, in every difficult and ordinary and beautiful way that a choice can be made to build something worth keeping, and they had kept it.